Today we're doing 5.2, 0 and negative exponents. There are two rules that you need to know. You need to understand and memorize that anything to the 0 power is 1. You also need to memorize that whenever you have a negative power or a negative exponent, if you flip the fraction and put it underneath, you get a positive. So really this is like a over 1. So if you flip it, the 1's on top and the a to the n is on the bottom. So the only thing that goes to the bottom is the top part. So let me do an actual example using those rules. The first rule is, using this rule right here, you have 10 to the negative 2 power. Well, we know that whenever we have a negative exponent, you always need to flip it to the bottom. So it's going to be 1 over 10 to the positive 2 power. And the 1 is a placeholder on top. So since it's now a positive 2, we have 10 squared, which is 100. So your answer is 1 over 100. Here I have negative 3 times c to the negative 2. Now this is not a negative exponent because my exponent is really a positive 1. So I'm for sure going to have a negative 3 on top. But since c is a negative, you have to put it on the bottom and make it a positive 2. And you can't reduce anything, so this is your answer for B. C, I have 2 to the negative 1 times a to the 0, b to the negative 3. We're going to look at each of these three pieces separately. First, you have 2 to the negative 1, so we know that we have to put 2 to the 1 on the bottom. A to the 0 power is just 1, so that's gone. B to the negative 3, you have to put that on the bottom, so it's b to the 3rd. You need a placeholder, so you have to write 1. So your answer is 1 over 2b to the 3rd. D. Here I have 3x to the negative 2. You still have your rules of exponents where you have a power to a power. So this is a power of 1 and this is a power of 1. So if you remember your rules, you need to multiply both of these by negative 2. So you're going to have 3 to the negative 2 power and x to the negative 2 power. Because 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. You are not doing 3 times negative 2. That is a big no. You are multiplying exponents, not base numbers. You never multiply base numbers together when you're dealing with exponents. So they're both negative, so you know that you need to flip them to the bottom. It's going to be 3 squared and x squared. So I have my placeholder 1, and 3 squared is really 9x squared. Example number 2. Let's do A, 10 to the negative 2 times, this means times, in this case it's not a variable, 10 to the negative 3. When you have 10 to the negative 2, you need to make that a fraction. But before we do that, let's look. I think it'll be easier this way. If we are multiplying these, and I know you're kind of used to seeing them like this, but in your book they're going to be multiplication signs, so like with an x, so I wrote it that way, but this means the same thing. So we know back from our laws of exponents that we can just add those exponents together, and we really have 10 to the negative 2 plus negative 3. And negative 2 plus negative 3 is 10 to the negative 5. Now that you simplify this, this is a lot easier to go ahead and write your fraction as 1 over 10 to the 5th. And 10 to the 5th is 100,000. So we have 5 zeros. And that is your final answer. B, what if I gave you negative 3 times 5 to the negative 1, the whole thing to the negative 2 power? you have a power to a power. So your power of this one is 1. Remember, you're not going to do negative 2 times negative 3. You're doing the 1 times the negative 2 and the negative 1 times the negative 2. So here we'll have 3 to the negative 2 and times 5 to the positive 2, because negative 1 times the negative 2 is a positive 2. So the only one we have to flip is this one right here. And you want to make sure that you know that this whole thing is in parentheses because it was to begin with. And remember, there was a difference between negative 3 without the parentheses and a 3 with the parentheses. So just to remind you, remember, if you have something like this, you are just squaring the 3 and it would be negative 9. If you have something like this, remember, you're doing negative 3 times negative 3, which is a positive 9. That's just a little reminder. Okay, so when we look here, it was in parentheses to begin with, so it's the whole thing squared. So we can flip this and make it 3 squared, and remember, it's negative in parentheses, right? And then we have times 5, and that'll just stay on top. So you can have times 5 squared over 1 if you want. And when you reduce this, you just have 1 times 5 squared is 5 squared, and negative 3 squared here. And 5 times 5, I'm going to run out of room, but is 25. And negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, which we showed you right here. So this is your answer for that one. C, I have 3 to the 0 power, x to negative 3y, over 2x to the negative 1, y to the negative 2. This just becomes 1. Remember, anything to the 0 power is 1. And let's just continue to look at what's on top first. And let's get rid of our negative exponents. Don't worry about what's on the bottom yet. We know that the x to the third is going to have to come on the bottom, and the y is going to stay on top because it's a positive. Now let's look at the denominator. Here we have a 2, so we can still have a 2 because that's a positive power of 1. X to the negative 1 we know is going to have to go on top and become a positive. And y to the negative 2 is also going to need to go on top because it is a negative. So we flipped everything that was a negative power, and now we can look and simplify here. We're going to have x, y to the 1 plus 2 is 3, and here we just have 2x to the third. Now that I've combined my exponents here, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can reduce my fraction. Well, here we have a 1 and we have a 3. So remember, we're going to do 3 minus 1, which is going to be 2. And it stays on the bottom because 3 is bigger than 1. The y doesn't have a partner, so it stays on top, and the 2 is alone. So your final answer is y to the third divided by 2x squared. Example number 3. We're going to have 2/3 to the negative third power. This is still power to a power. Remember, this is the power of 2 to the 1 and 3 to the 1. So remember, you have to use your rules where you multiply the top and the bottom power. So it's 2 to the 1, so 1 times negative 3 is negative 3, and 1 times negative 3 is negative 3 for this guy. And now you have negative exponents, so you got to flip those. The 2 to the third is going to come on the bottom, and the 3 to the third is going to go on top. Now they're positive, and they're not the same base, so you're not subtracting anything, so we can just reduce. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, and 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. You cannot reduce this any further, so this is your final answer. B. I have 2x to the negative 2 power over 5y to the third and it's to the whole power of negative 1. We're going to go ahead and multiply our exponents by that negative 1. So it's 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 2 times 1, negative 1 is positive 2. Then we'll multiply the bottom. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. So now that we've done that, we got to get rid of our negative exponents. Let's just start on top first. 2 to the negative 1, we have to make it 2 to the 1 on the bottom. The x squared is already a positive, so that's good. 5 to the negative 1 needs to go on top, and y to the third needs to go on top as well. So now that we have this, we look to see if we can simplify anything. And we cannot, so this is your final answer. Last example, number 4. The directions will say on your classwork, write without using fractions. Oops, gotta spell it right. Okay, these are the two we're going to do, and then we're done with notes. Since usually what we've been doing, if we go back here, is we are finding a fraction. I'm giving you negative exponents and you're simplifying it into a fraction. Here, we're going to do the opposite. It's giving you the fraction, and you need to write it in terms of exponents. Well, 3 is just 3 to the power of 1. That's its exponent. But when I look at the denominator, I know that I have 10 to the 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. So that's going to be the 4th power. And I would need to get this, and I call it like getting it all on one line. So if I want to move this up here, I would need to have 3 times 10 to the negative 4. I would have to make it negative to flip it. So I like doing the opposite. Before, whenever you have a negative, remember you turn it into a fraction, but here I don't want the fraction. I want to put it up on top. So this would be your answer for A. Let's look at this one then. This one's okay. The 5x squared, that's good. That's just 5 to the 1 and x squared. But we need to put this up here on top. So in order to do that, I'm going to make it y to the negative 1, z to the negative 3. And you see how I don't have any fractions anymore, and I call it like all on one line. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of how I think of it. So no fraction, no denominator. And that's it for tonight.